Inside the sterile visitation booth of a high-security prison in Wisconsin, a voice crackled through the phone line. It wasn't trembling. It wasn't remorseful. It was calm. Chillingly calm. "I cut his head off," she said. That voice belonged to Taylor Schabusiness, a woman now serving life in prison for a crime that stunned America. In February 2022, in the quiet town of Green Bay, Wisconsin, a mother walked into her basement, expecting to call her son for dinner. What she found instead was the unimaginable: a human head inside a bucket, and traces of a horror so grotesque it defied language. The victim was her son Shad Thyrion, just 24 years old. The perpetrator? His former girlfriend Taylor Schabusiness. The story unraveled like a grotesque nightmare. The two had taken meth together. Then, in a haze of drugs and obsession, Taylor strangled Shad with a chain, mutilated his body, and performed unspeakable acts. When she was arrested the next morning, she didn't resist. She didn't deny. She simply said, "I went too far." That statement triggered a national reckoning. What turns a young woman from a seemingly ordinary background into the architect of one of the most brutal crimes in recent memory? Was this a drug-fueled frenzy, a descent into madness, or something far more calculated? In this video, Echoes of the Court takes you deep into the heart of the Schabusiness case. We'll retrace the mental collapse of the killer, the tragic demise of the victim, the chilling crime scene, and the courtroom drama that left jurors speechless. Most importantly, we'll confront the question that still lingers in the minds of many. Did justice truly prevail? Or are there darker truths still buried beneath the surface? Don't forget to follow Echoes of the Court, where we explore the world's most haunting criminal cases through the lens of legal insight, psychological investigation, and cinematic storytelling. Before his name was linked to headlines soaked in horror, Shad Thyrion was simply a gentle, soft-spoken young man trying to navigate life in Green Bay, Wisconsin. He lived with his parents and grandparents in a modest household, marked by both love and hardship. Friends remembered him as someone who always tried to make others feel safe, even when he, himself, felt lost. His relationship with Taylor Schabusiness wasn't a fairy tale. It was turbulent, codependent, and increasingly destructive. The pair had a long-standing connection, one often fueled by methamphetamine and emotional volatility. They broke up and reunited more times than anyone could count, each time deeper in dysfunction than before. On that fateful February night, Shad agreed to meet Taylor in the basement of his mother's house. They took drugs together. He trusted her like he always had. He didn't know that she had brought with her not just meth, but a chain, a knife, and an intent he wouldn't live to understand. In court, Shad's mother, Tara Pakanich, broke down while describing the moment she found the bucket in the basement. "I just wanted to tell him dinner was ready," she sobbed. "But what I found couldn't have been my son." What happened next defied logic. Investigators found body parts strewn across the home, a chaotic aftermath of cruelty and disregard. Taylor had not only killed Shad, she had desecrated his body and left a scene so disturbing that seasoned officers needed trauma counseling afterward. Shad's death was not quick. It wasn't clean. And worst of all, it came at the hands of someone he once believed loved him. Did he ever suspect? Did he feel fear in his final moments? Was there a flicker of realization that love had turned to something monstrous? Those questions will never be answered. Shad didn't get to say goodbye. The only voice left is that of his killer. Taylor Schabusiness wasn't born a killer. She was born into chaos. Raised in Wisconsin, Taylor's life was marked by instability from the start. Her father had a criminal record. Her mother battled mental illness, and the home environment was one of emotional neglect and frequent disruption. Taylor bounced between schools and households, never forming the kind of stable bonds that might ground a child in reality. As she got older, the cracks became fissures, self-harm, truancy, and drug use painted a picture of a young woman spiraling out of control. Mental health records showed Taylor had been in and out of psychiatric care. She had spent time in rehab. At various points, professionals had flagged her as a danger to herself and others. But she slipped through the cracks of every system meant to help her. By the time she met Shad Thyrion, she wasn't looking for love. She was looking for someone who wouldn't leave. To Taylor, Shad wasn't just a partner. He was an anchor in a world that spun too fast. And when that anchor started to drift, she didn't let go. She latched on harder. What unfolded in their final encounter wasn't a crime of passion. It was a manifestation of obsession, paranoia, and possession. Taylor didn't just kill Shad, she consumed him emotionally, mentally, and physically, in a frenzy that blurred the lines between violence and intimacy. What chilled investigators, jurors, and the public wasn't just what Taylor did, but how she talked about it afterward. In phone calls from jail, she recounted the murder with unnerving detachment. She joked. She compared herself to serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, another infamous figure from Wisconsin. "I was obsessed with him," she admitted. "Maybe I'm like that too." One psychologist described her as a textbook case of mixed personality disorder, compounded by drug-induced psychosis. But even that diagnosis couldn't shield her from accountability. The evidence was overwhelming. She had full awareness of what she was doing. She just didn't care. Taylor's mind wasn't a black void. It was a maze, twisted, chaotic, and laced with just enough clarity to be terrifying. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't express remorse. What's perhaps most haunting is this: she didn't want to be saved. When officers first arrived at the modest home on Stony Brook Lane in Green Bay, Wisconsin, they expected a routine welfare check. What they walked into would haunt them for the rest of their careers. Down in the basement, inside a gray plastic bucket, they found what no one should ever have to witness: a human head, later confirmed to be that of Shad Thyrion. The body had been dismembered, and various parts were scattered throughout the house. In the bedroom, signs of a violent struggle were clear. Blood on the walls, a large dog chain soaked in red, and a kitchen knife discarded on the floor. One detective would later describe the scene as a living nightmare, one of the most horrific we've ever seen. Many officers who processed the crime scene required trauma counseling. Even seasoned crime scene technicians reportedly paused to compose themselves between tasks. This was not just a killing. It was a desecration of the human form. Investigators pieced together a chilling timeline. After taking meth together, Taylor strangled Shad with the chain, likely while he was still conscious. She then mutilated his body, continuing her actions long after he was gone. Portions of Shad's body were placed in bags, bins, and boxes. Some were left in plain sight. Others were tucked away like they didn't matter. Security footage from nearby homes showed Taylor leaving around 3 a.m. wearing a backpack. When police searched the bag, they found tools, blood-stained clothing, a used condom, and an open bottle of methamphetamine. When questioned the next day, Taylor was unshaken. She asked officers, "How much of the body have you found?" It wasn't a confession, it was a challenge. Throughout the interrogation, Taylor remained eerily composed. She laughed. She made graphic jokes. She described the sound of bones snapping and skin tearing, with a detachment that chilled even the most hardened detectives. She referred to the experience as a trip, like something out of a dream. But there was nothing dreamy about what she had done. The crime scene spoke for itself. A house turned into a slaughterhouse. A basement turned into a tomb. This was no impulsive act. It was a slow, deliberate unraveling of both body and sanity. Law enforcement in Green Bay would later say, "We pray we never see anything like this again." In the courtroom of Brown County, Wisconsin, a trial unfolded that many wished they could unhear. It wasn't the lack of evidence that made it difficult. It was the unbearable weight of the truth. Every detail, every photograph, every recording played in court pushed the boundaries of what the human psyche could endure. The question wasn't whether Taylor Schabusiness had committed the crime. It was whether the court and the world could stomach what she had done. Taylor entered the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, eyes distant, demeanor indifferent. To the public, she was the embodiment of a nightmare. To her defense attorneys, she was an enigma. And to Shad's grieving family, she was the reason their lives would never be whole again. Her legal team tried to argue insanity. They claimed Taylor was in the throes of drug-induced psychosis, incapable of understanding right from wrong. Experts were brought in to debate whether her mental state at the time qualified as legal insanity. Some believed she was deeply disturbed. Others insisted she was fully aware. But the prosecution didn't rely on speculation. They had video evidence, physical evidence, and Taylor's own words. In jailhouse phone calls played for the jury, Taylor described the crime in chilling detail, laughing, recounting how she cut off Shad's head, how she lingered over the sound of his bones cracking. "If I had the chance, I'd do it again," she said casually. Jurors sat in stunned silence. Several wept. The courtroom at times felt more like a morgue than a space for justice. The district attorney called the case a roadmap to hell. He argued that this wasn't a momentary lapse in sanity, but a calculated, callous act of cruelty. Taylor had planned aspects of the murder. She had the tools. She had the intent. And most disturbingly, she seemed to have enjoyed it. After just 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict. Guilty. Fully competent. No excuses. No mercy. The judge sentenced Taylor Schabusiness to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the harshest penalty allowed in Wisconsin. She showed no emotion as the sentence was read. In a statement to the court, Shad's mother sobbed, "I have nothing left to forgive. I only pray to God that no one else ever sees what I saw." Taylor simply smiled, then turned and walked away. Some names fade after the headlines disappear. Others, for better or worse, remain etched into the public consciousness. Taylor Schabusiness is one of those names not because of talent or achievement, but because of the depth of the horror she inflicted. The cruel irony is this: her name still echoes, while Shad Thyrion has been buried along with the rest of him. His death didn't just shatter a family, it rattled an entire community. It forced law enforcement, healthcare systems, and the public to confront the gaps that allowed someone like Taylor to slip through. How could a woman with a long history of drug abuse, psychiatric instability, violent behavior, and failed rehab attempts move so freely through society until it was too late? In the wake of the trial, Green Bay authorities announced changes in how they monitor individuals with severe mental health and substance abuse histories. Grassroots organizations held memorials and educational campaigns, not just in memory of Shad, but as a warning. Evil doesn't always come from the shadows. Sometimes, it grows in plain sight while no one's paying attention. For Shad's family, life has become a series of quiet battles. His mother withdrew from public life. In a rare interview, she said, "I don't hate her. I hate the way the world let her become what she did." Meanwhile, Taylor, despite her life sentence, still has a voice. She speaks through phone calls, letters, and media interviews. She recounts the crime with a disturbing casualness, comparing herself to other infamous killers, basking in a warped kind of infamy. That, perhaps, is what enrages people most. The killer has the spotlight. The victim is a footnote. Justice was served in the eyes of the court. But true justice? That's more elusive. Because for every headline with Taylor's name, there should be one remembering Shad not for how he died, but for how he lived. Today, Taylor Schabusiness sits behind bars in a maximum security prison in Wisconsin. With a sentence of life without parole, she will never walk free again. But in some ways, her reach extends beyond prison walls. Her face, her voice, her name, they still circulate in articles, documentaries, interviews, and online forums. And that leaves us with a haunting realization. The system may have imprisoned her body, but it hasn't silenced her presence. The trial is over. The verdict has been delivered. The sentence has been carried out. But what remains is the unsettling residue of a crime that words can barely contain. Justice, in its legal sense, was served. But was it enough? This case forces us to ask hard questions. How many Taylors are still out there unnoticed, untreated, unchecked? What does it say about our institutions that someone with such a long and visible history of instability could go unnoticed until it was too late? And what happens when the legal system does its part, but the emotional wreckage lingers for generations? The Schabusiness case is a wake-up call not just about the horrors one person can commit, but about the slow, quiet failures that allow such horrors to manifest. It's about the overlooked child who becomes a threat, the untreated trauma that festers into violence, the systems that were too late or too indifferent to act. For Shad's family, there is no going back. No verdict, no sentence, no public outcry will restore what they've lost. His story ended in a basement on a cold February night. His name, for many, has become secondary to the name of the one who took him. And that is the final tragedy. Justice isn't always redemption. Sometimes, it's simply the act of making sure the suffering doesn't spread to someone else. In that sense, justice was done. But peace? Closure? Those are luxuries this case may never offer. Because in the space where law ends and memory begins, we may learn to forgive, but we must never forget.